Welcome back, dividend growth and value investors. Generally speaking, there is a widespread belief that evaluating pharma stocks requires a deep understanding of the industry and its unique challenges. This means that we should possess deep scientific knowledge, and it would require us to have a PhD in biology and a deep understanding of biotech and everything related to the molecules in their portfolio. I actually would agree with this if we would only be talking about new and upcoming biotech players that don't have any pipeline worth mentioning yet. However, I do disagree with this notion when we are talking about the top big pharma players in the world. I strongly believe that we can assess several factors which allow us to assess one of the most important aspects of a dividend growth stock, its dividend safety profile. To be able to do this, we would need to get a good understanding of their pipeline from a risk management perspective. This doesn't require a lot of in-depth knowledge because most of the knowledge is already out there. Hence, we just need to know what to look for, how to find it, and understand our level of appetite for risk. When approached like that, I believe it shouldn't be too difficult to assess a big pharma stock, and therefore we don't need to miss out on some of these iconic dividend growth stocks. So where to get started then? Well, let's just start with the basics. It is essential to know that a US patent is typically granted for 20 years from the moment the patent application is filed. So let's call it here. On the other hand, it takes about 10 years for a drug to get to its first sale, provided that it passes all the regulatory approvals. And if you then realize that it costs approximately 2.6 billion to bring a new drug to the market, then no wonder that drugs are so expensive, because approximately 90% of all drug development fails. And I think that this picture shows it really well, because the probability of success per phase declines rapidly after the preclinical tests, and then even still during phase 1, 2 and 3 you can see a rate of success of 66, 48 and 59%. So what it means really, if we look at this here, 90% of all the initial research will never see daylight. But this is just getting acceptance. It gets even more complex, because to be able to sell your drugs, you would also need, in most cases, to get reimbursement from the local health authority. They typically use the following quadrant to assess the drugs, where it is a combination of the quality of life improvement versus the drug price. In other words, to really be able to charge whatever you want requires you to make a total game changer for a certain disease. This is most often not the case, hence there are limits to how much you can replace a former blockbuster. So knowing this, let me first share with you my analysis of the 14 big pharma stocks in the world. To judge the quality of a company, I'm looking for 3 main angles. How much a single drug concentration risk is there in their current portfolio? How financially strong is the company? This is important to understand whether the company can acquire other drug companies or smaller biotech companies with high prospects, and their dividend profile, for instance dividend yield and payout ratio. All these 3 should allow me to assess their dividend safety, and the strong observer can notice that I haven't therefore looked into their new drug development pipeline. That's correct, and I find this a little bit less relevant for these major players, because it's not pure drug development that allows them to earn money. Actually, many of the big players in this list are not the original inventor of the molecule. What these big players offer is a strong manufacturing capability and a sales force, and that's why they are often partnering with the smaller players by bringing their drugs to the market. In that way, they can negotiate on the revenue sharing model, and this is how many of the big pharma companies earn typically 50% of their entire sales. A great example of that is Sanofi's number 1 selling drug, Dupixent. That drug is actually developed by Regeneron, and they both share the revenues. Hence, I feel I don't need to put so much weight on their early drug development pipeline, and rather look at the following 3 factors. The impact of the number 1 selling drug compared to their revenue. Also, is it in a growth trend or in a downtrend? When is the patent expiring? Or in some cases, when are peak sales expected? Remember, others can come with a newer patent targeting the same disease with a higher efficacy or better pricing point. In that case, your patent doesn't need to be worth that much anymore. I then did the same for the entire top 3 selling drugs, because still this shows us how much of their revenue comes from it and how much risk is exposed and how well the pipeline is diversified. And from there I went into their financials and looked at their balance sheet strength, earnings yield, free cash flow statements, and finally their dividend profile. And one of the pictures that you see in front of you here that I showed you already several times are the top 10 pharma companies in the world. And here you can see, for instance, that Pfizer has a really large dependency on their top selling drug Comirnaty. What is this? This is simply the name of their COVID-19 vaccine. But you can also see here Merck with Keytruda or Humira from AbbVie. These are drugs that have a large impact in their total portfolio at the moment. And if these go off patent, like AbbVie is currently experiencing now, this means the typical patent cliff that we're talking about. So as an example, if we compare the top 3 drugs and their percentage of sales with the free cash flow payout ratio, then you can safely say that a high dependency on their top 3 drugs should mean a lower payout ratio as well. Otherwise, there's too much risk in case those sales go off patent. A good example is Pfizer, who's still benefiting a lot from the COVID vaccine and COVID treatment drugs. They have the lowest payout ratio, and rightly so. On the other end, you can see that Johnson & Johnson has a higher payout ratio, but their pipeline again is really well diversified. And what is also very interesting is that almost all the European players are actually more on the conservative spectrum of this. When we look at their pipeline diversification, it's of course really diversified if you're in the low range here, and at the same time having a relatively low payout ratio. In general, you would say they have still a lot of room to grow from here. Anyway, this is my entire analysis stored here in this G-sheet based on the latest earnings from 2022, because all the companies have reported by now. What you will see here is like what have been the top sales, the top selling drugs. So in this case, Pfizer again, Comirnaty, what the drug sales was in the total volume, 37.8 billion, how much percentage of sales it was, and whether there's a trend of decline or growth. At the same time, you will also see here when the drug is expected to be expired. Sometimes I had to actually look at peak sales, and specifically if the drug expiration was not clear to me. Because what you need to know is just for a single drug, often there are like dozens of patents. Because what you can see here is if we go, for instance, to AbbVie and we look at Humira, it's both applicable to arthritis and psoriasis. So bet me there are 2 patents here, and there might be even more patents because, you know, the initial patent is for a certain way of injection, and then the second patent might be, for instance, to do it via a pill. So there's a whole range of patents that they fire around such a drug. And on top of that, let's also not forget that they are filing in different countries. So whether it's the US or Europe can even make a difference. So having said that, these dates might therefore always not be entirely accurate, but also peak sales where funds and forecasting information has been used alternatively. So you see this also for the second biggest drugs, the third selling drugs, and then after that you see me here having all the balance sheet data to allow me to calculate the debt to equity ratio, the basics from the income statement, the basics from the cash flow statement, some dividend metrics, the dividend safety, how I scored it. I then also looked at their valuation, for instance, price to earnings, price to their own reported earnings, so the adjusted earnings, which is typically higher here because they tend to exclude the R&D expenses out of the earnings, and the price to free cash flow. And this is the one that I really think is most important here with these companies because the free cash flow tells everything. Having said that, I then used a really simplified model of evaluating via the dividend discount model. If you expect that a dividend is one of your rewards as a shareholder, and that's the only reward that you're giving, and you want this to grow over the years, and you assume, for instance, 6% dividend growth, then you will see that Pfizer, for instance, has a fair value of $41. So you will find all the 14 stocks in here that I've analyzed. These are the 14 biggest players in the world, at least in the Western world, let's say, that I have access to. And I believe that this file can be really helpful for you as well. Now, what I have done is I have entered the link to this file in the description of this video. It should allow you to comment. So guys, if you find some mistakes in the data, please comment and I will try to process them, because all together we will then have the most accurate information about our top 14 big pharma stocks. So having said that, guys, I really believe that you don't need to be a biologist and an expert in DNA to be able to assess big pharma stocks. These big pharma stocks are more about portfolio management, and I hope I demystified and clarified a little bit of that in this video. I also hope with this that you feel comfortable picking your next own big pharma stock. It doesn't mean it doesn't come without any effort. You will still have to look into their 3 financial statements, and you will also have to look at their portfolio and how diversified it is. But guys, we can really keep it simple, stupid here. Having said that, please also expect from me very soon another video based on this research in which I will discuss 5 pharma stocks that I believe are reasonably priced right now. Guys, have a good week. See you again.